Welcome to Now Let's Talk, the podcast, with Vanessa Corwin and Kathleen Kahn, where we speak with our guests about the joys and challenges of life in today's world. Hello, I'm Vanessa Corwin.
And I'm Kathleen Kahn.
As we were editing this interview, we saw the explosive exchange at the White House between Trump and President Zelensky as Ukraine war peace talks fell apart on February 28th. Zelensky left at Trump's request without signing any deal. With us today to discuss these developments is Ukraine and Russia expert Professor Alexander Motyl of Rutgers University. Welcome, Alex. Thanks for joining us. So what's your take on all this?
Was shocking. And frankly, Zelensky made two mistakes. One is he spoke in English.
I thought about that.
And he shouldn't have. He should have used an interpreter. I mean, his English is adequate for a casual conversation, but not really for high diplomacy when you're facing scores of press people. And the second mistake was, and this is where he should have been briefed by his people, he looked at the event as an opportunity to exchange views, to talk, iron things out, make statements about the nature of the war, about Putin and so on. And instead, he should have realized that this was a press conference where what you're supposed to do is smile, put on a happy face, insist that Trump is a genius, and then say nothing, and then pretty much just end his conversation with that. He didn't understand that this was a press conference, whereas in contrast, both Vance and Trump knew very well that they were playing to the peanut gallery. They used this as an opportunity to demean Zelensky, to make themselves look like these heroic superhero types of guys. And they treated him with complete and utter disrespect. What struck me was that, the conversation was pretty much civil and, there were no altercations until Zelensky said, well, between 2014 and 2022, there were 4 presidents and none of them did anything to help us, which frankly is true. A bunch of javelins is nice, but it's not exactly the same as significant military assistance. So basically, Zelensky implied, or frankly even stated, that Biden and Trump were equally ineffective with regard to Ukraine. And he was right. But that's the sort of thing you say at the negotiating table. You don't say this on television, because it then just unleashed a storm of criticism by Trump and by Vance. And if you read the text, it all seems so picayune. At one point, remember, Zelensky says, well, you're lucky because you have an ocean between you and Russia, but in the future you will feel, and he can't even finish the sentence. And Trump insists like 10 or 20 times, how do you know what we will feel? You have no right.
Exactly.
Why would that even be an issue?
He wouldn't let him talk. He kept interrupting.
Yeah, and again, why would that be an issue? And that, of course, the problem is that touches Trump's ego. And Vance, of course, being kind of the lapdog, immediately says, oh, this is our great president, and you're supposed to be respectful, and you're supposed to show gratitude. When was he supposed to show gratitude? For one thing, Ukraine has shown gratitude for the last 3 years. At every step of the way, they always thank the Americans. Yeah. But when was he supposed to show gratitude? The first half of the press conference was questions by the press to the 3 individuals. And then after that, Zelensky was almost automatically berated for implying that Trump was somehow inadequate. Anyway, so this is where we stand now. As you know, Trump then he canceled the meeting. They were supposed to have a lunch. Zelensky then wrote on X that he thinks America is great, blah, blah, blah. Clearly, Zelensky, for better or for worse, will have to get on his knees and ask for forgiveness. There is no alternative because Ukraine needs this deal. And even if it didn't need the deal, it needs American, if not support, then it certainly doesn't need American enmity, hostility. So he's going to have to get on his knees and genuflect before the great God, Trump, and ask for forgiveness. And Trump did leave an opening. He said, he's welcome back in the White House if he wants peace. So Zelensky will have to do something along those lines. Alternatively, I mean, if push comes to shove and Trump proves to be recalcitrant and says, no way, no how, I can't deal with this guy, Zelensky may have to consider resigning. And that may be the only way to salvage the situation. On the other hand, it's not, the ball isn't only in Zelensky's court. Because, of course, if Trump lets his emotions get the better of him, then he may be inclined to let Putin win. For one thing, that would be a disaster for everybody.
Yeah.
But it would also make Trump look like a wimp. So in a way, Trump, if he were smart, and that, of course, is something that requires a question mark, and if he were truly interested in American interest, he should extend a hand to Zelensky. And there's all sorts of diplomatic ways in which you can do that. I mean, after all, after having called Zelensky a dictator, he pretended not to have said this. So he could pretend that the press conference never took place.
Yeah.
There you go.
Right.
Again, seriously.
Yeah. What press conference?
What press conference? Did I say that?
That's his new thing. Did I say that?
He could easily extend a hand, send out diplomatic signals. Zelensky could respond. They can send each other flowers, that kind of thing.
I honestly don't see Trump doing that. I mean, he made a fool of himself in front of the world, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, let me put it this way. That is certainly true. But I don't think he cares. That's really the bottom line. He doesn't care what Greenland, Panama, Mexico, Canada, Europe, Ukraine, and anybody else thinks. He's the genius and he's the king. And when you come to his court, you have to genuflect.
Yeah.
And that was Zelensky's mistake. He didn't do it.
He didn't do it. Now, do you think that J.D. Vance was really the instigator of this, that he was the one who came out first?
He seems to have been, as I recall. And clearly, poor Zelensky, with his limited English, was up against two guys. But Vance is very articulate. Trump isn't as articulate, but he's insistent and doesn't let you get a word in edgewise. And it was so typical for the entire procedure. I mean, poor Zelensky is sitting there trying to say, excuse me,
Yeah, yeah.
And they're not listening. They just go on and on and on and on and on and on.
No.
It was a nightmare.
I mean, in a way, I'm almost tempted to say it was a setup.
Somebody else said that on CNN or MSNBC. Do you think it was a setup? And once they said that, I thought, what do you think?
Again, it's pure speculation, but it may be that Trump decided in the last minute that he doesn't like this rare earth mineral deal, that he's making too many concessions to Ukraine. And maybe he decided, what the hell, let's torpedo this thing. And instead of saying, I'm not going to sign, because that makes him look like the heavy, he basically dumps everything on Zelensky, insisting that he's disrespectful and he has no cards and all that kind of rhetoric. Conceivably, again, we just don't know. But it would certainly fit the pattern of his behavior. We'll see. Could
you talk a little bit about these rare minerals and why they are of such value in these negotiations?
Well, again, I'm not a geologist. So all I know is that they're very important for modern technology, the IT, AI sectors, and so on. We have very little of them. The Chinese have a lot. And that, of course, makes us dependent on the Chinese, which is the last thing that Trump, or for that matter, Biden, would have wanted. So finding an alternative source of these minerals, which are, again, critical to AI and so on, is strategically important. It's not just a good business move. It's actually important for preserving the security and safety and ultimately the prosperity of the United States. So, and Zelensky, again, he and his team, when they several months ago, you may recall, they proposed a peace plan, which consisted of some 7 or 8 points. And a lot of it was just kind of boilerplate. The Russians withdraw, we reoccupy, and so on. But one of the elements that the Ukrainians mentioned in this peace plan was that since they have something like $26 trillion worth of rare earth minerals, some of which are in Russian territory, Russian occupied territory. So it's probably, let's say it's 15 or 20 trillion. That's still a chunk of change.
Yeah.
And and the Ukrainian peace plan included a clause to the effect that they would be willing to share this wealth with the West, with the United States, in exchange for assistance, security guarantees, and so on. So, to his credit, Zelensky clearly saw, I think, this is my guess, he saw that Trump is going to win, and that he also saw that the only way of effectively getting him interested in anything is by appealing to his sense of business. Basically, he was offering him implicitly, if not explicitly, he was offering Trump a really good deal.
So you think the door is still open for this deal?
Well, again, if Trump really hates the deal, then it's pretty much closed. But if he's genuinely interested, and he should be because it's very advantageous to the US, then with a little bit of diplomacy and some cooler tempers, wonders can be achieved. But it will require Zelensky will have to get on his knees and crawl to the White House, and Trump, in contrast, will have to be magnanimous and say, "Oh, we're pals, and pals always argue and disagree, and we had a heated exchange, but we love one another." Blah blah.
I got the impression that, and I may be wrong, that although they didn't give Zelensky a chance to say anything, I think he felt like they were saying, we want this deal, but it has to be our way, and that Putin's going to get something.
And that's possible too. Trump insists that Putin wants peace. I mean, if you know anything about Putin and his record and his rhetoric, it's pretty clear that there's the one thing in the world that he definitely does not want is peace. But clearly Trump is willing to make certain concessions. One of the points that he made that was, more or less valid is, how do you expect me to call him a dictator? What am I going to do? Call him a dictator and then pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Vlad, let's negotiate." And he's got a point.
Yeah, I get that, but he kept talking about, we went through the same thing together, Russia and the United States, right?
Well, that entire riff towards the end about Hunter Biden and stupid Biden. I mean, God almighty. At that point, Trump reveals himself for the guy he is.
Exactly.
Because everything ultimately comes to himself.
Right, exactly. Of course.
And the fact that he's supposedly persecuted and Biden is an idiot and he's the smartest man in the world. So somehow we got from Zelensky and the rare earth minerals deal to Biden.
Don't forget
to Hunter Biden's laptop. Not, it's
right.
like,
and it's like, what in God's name? How does your mind work? And then he makes these absurd claims like Zelensky having 4% popularity, whereas the real number is about 57. That's just so totally crazy. If he said 40 as opposed to 57, all right, whatever. A 4 versus 57?
Yeah.
Then what is it? Like 50 million condoms were distributed in
Palestine? Oh, right.
Where does he get that number?
Yeah, he can't help himself from lying. He can't help himself. He lies.
And he can't help himself from being a bully.
That too.
That's basically it, right?
That too.
He's like a gangster leader,
Exactly.
A very slight insult, or at least a perceived insult, is immediately hey, you're dissing me. And if you're dissing me, you're going to get it.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's like Zelensky didn't say a single insulting word.
No.
Let him.
But again, his mistake was to think that this was a conversation and not a performance.
No.
What do you think the rest of the world, our allies, thought of this? How is this going to shake it up enough where it makes us weak?
Well, a number of Europeans, I was just reading this on the internet, something like 4 or 5 European leaders wrote to Zelensky expressing their solidarity with him.
Hmm.
I'm assuming it's not just 4 or 5, that probably
Yes.
many more will do that, if only to annoy Trump. But this is just going to increase the rift between Europe and the US. They need to make themselves as independent of the United States as possible. And that, of course, raises questions for the Brits who aren't within the EU, the Canadians, and everybody else. If I were a South Korean, I'd be worried. You know, if Russia can get away with Ukraine, why can't
Hmm.
North Korea get away with attacking South
That's it.
Korea? What's to stop them?
I couldn't believe he sort of insinuated that Zelensky could start World War III.
I know. It's like I just don't know what to. I mean, Zelensky, World War
Like
III.
what?
World War III.
How
World War
exactly is that
Three.
supposed to happen? Meanwhile, Russia has attacked, has an army of close to 2 million, and they're
Yes.
okay. That's not a problem.
Yeah. Now, you think Zelensky will go and kiss the ring and make
I think
amends?
I think he'll have to. He has to. If he does, that'll make him a leader that the future historians and Ukrainians will respect very highly, because he'll show that he was willing to sacrifice his career for the good of the people. And he's got a good track record in that regard,
Yeah.
right? I mean, after the invasion took
Yeah,
place, he stayed. He could have gotten on the first plane to Paris, but instead he didn't.
that's right.
He's basically stopped living a normal life for the last 3 years. He said at that press conference last week that he would be willing to resign if
Yeah.
that got Ukraine
Yes.
into NATO. So there's lots of indirect evidence suggesting that he might do it. Disregarding the fact that Trump is the guy, he's the heavy, he's the one who made this thing a catastrophe. And then when you consider that USAID is being dismantled, has been
Right.
dismantled. So basically what Trump is telling the world is we don't care about soft power. We're not about changing hearts and minds. We're not about trying to tell the world that America has values. We're certainly not about condemning overt acts of aggression. We're basically about money and power. And that's the message that we're sending.
As usual, Alex, thank you so much for your insights, and we will be watching the latest developments along with the rest of the world. Thanks for joining us. We'd love to hear from you, so please visit our website at nowletstalkthepodcast.com and send us your comments and questions. We'll see you next time.